Hello and welcome to Gallery 406 at Elon University. We're thrilled tonight to have the students, faculty, administrators of Elon in attendance, as well as members of our broader community. We thank you all for your participation, involvement, and your commitment to our program, as well as our gallery. The talk tonight is by our exhibiting artist, Neil Callander. He'll be speaking for roughly 30 minutes and then has agreed to open the floor to questions and comments. I look forward to not only what Neil has to say tonight, but also hearing thoughts and questions from you all. As a few more students are still running in from class to join us, I'm going to take this time to let you know what's coming up in our gallery this spring. Our next exhibition opens up on March 29th. Lee Merrill, an American artist working primarily with photography, creates digitally collaged photographic and video works that explore our contemporary landscapes and the impact of desire, simulation, and perception in the built environment. Familiar elements such as the lawn, manicured and manipulated plants, new buildings that mimic other eras and locations reveal a culture of perpetual longing. Merrill's work is housed in many permanent collections, has been included in online print publications such as the Washington Post, After Image Magazine, the New York Times, as well as many, many others. Please continue following us so that you can hear more about our upcoming exhibition and virtual lecture. Tonight, we're honored to have Neil Callander speak about his work and offer us some context to this amazing exhibition. He's an artist and an educator, born in Louisville, Kentucky. Neil earned a BFA at Indiana University, an MFA from Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers. In 2005, he received a full fellowship to be a summer resident at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. After graduate school, Neil worked for a painter as a painter for the artist Jeff Koons in his New York studio. I'm guessing that he could fill an additional hour just speaking about that component of his life. In 2007, Neil and his family stepped into the dark side. They actually crossed the Brooklyn Bridge and they left New York to pursue careers as professional teachers and artists. Currently, Neil and his wife, Adrienne, are assistant professors of art at the University of Arkansas and live in a household of makers and dogs in Fayetteville. Neil's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo exhibitions at Goose Barnacle in Brooklyn, Bowling Green State University, and the Kentucky School of Art in Louisville. He's a member of Zexus, an association of still life painters based in New York City. Venues for group exhibitions include Manifest Gallery in Cincinnati, the Huntsville Museum of Art in Alabama, the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson, New Gallery of Modern Art in Charlotte. Just to make sure that you don't assume he's just sweeping through the South, he also has shown in the First Street Gallery in New York City, Washington Art Association, Connecticut, Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, among many, many, many others. And finally, a side note about how we find and select artists for our gallery. We advertise nationally, and in the prospectus, in addition to normal requirements of submitting images and artist statements and CVs, we also say something about selecting the work. We say priority will be given to work that is in dialogue with contemporary practices and ideas. The exhibition would ideally then be used to expand or frame conversations about contemporary definitions of art, materiality, and or process. When the committee saw Neil's work, we thought this would be a great fit for our gallery. And then when I met Neil here on campus to set up his work, and he began talking about the conceptual and formal approaches of his work, and how he incorporates those into his painting, I knew we had found a great match. I've been talking to my painting students who are in attendance tonight that painting has experienced 1,000 deaths, from Anne Reinhardt's black paintings, through deconstruction, through the phase of ghost paintings and shitty paintings, the revival of representational art, smart art, and so on. Painting always seems to be at the hub of discussion about either its death, rebirth, birth. This is exactly why I think an article by John Yao in The Hyperallergic sums Neil's work up so concisely. John says, whatever the subject, Callander uses color, light, and absence of light to establish mood. His interest in disposable things, beer cans, takeout boxes, outmoded products, VHS tapes and analog televisions, and paperback books, objects that symbolize one's economic class, and skulls implicitly critique society's thirst for the latest and the newest. Working on these paintings over long periods, pushing them in different directions, and never settling for a signature style, Callander rejects the art world's demand for novelty, entertainment, and the timely production of the latest brand. This is partly why he is not better known, and also why he should be, unquote. While this article was written in 2019 and much of this current exhibition is brand new, and I know that because as I was helping him carry the paintings out of the van, he yelled, "Hey, they're still wet." Easy does it. I cannot help but believe much of the work of what John wrote remains true. Neil's work addresses painting, both as a conceptual and formal exercise, and I'm thrilled my students get to hear you speak about your work now. So this is where it gets a little awkward virtually, and I understand you cannot clap, but please help me welcome Neil Callander. Neil, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you for that introduction. Thank you. That was so kind. And then thanks everyone for coming. I'm watching the participants. We have 101. That's great. I don't even get to see who you are, but I'm sure I'll find out somehow. It's a real privilege here to join you guys and to talk about my work. I mean, I wish I was in person, but this does allow for certain opportunities to invite people from all over the country or world. I don't know where everyone's from. So just a little preamble. This talk is laid out chronologically, starting in college, so like 20 years ago, and ending with the work that's in the exhibition. But I want to make sure that everyone's aware, especially the students, that we'll be taking big steps across the river of time, from stepping stone to stepping stone, and it's going to maybe sound like very coherent, like I had it figured out and was just progressing without a lot of pain and struggle. But I promise you that in between those stones, there was just tangential work, bad work, good work that seems tangential now in this context. There's just a lot of other things that happened between those big stones. I'm going to try to move quickly through this lecture part, and I really hope we can have a kind of robust question and answer. Hopefully I can evoke some sort of comments or questions from the group. So this might be kind of formal, more formal than I would like to be, but I want to make sure we have enough time. Okay. So when I was waking up to painting, by which I mean I was going and looking at paintings in museums and galleries with the intention of learning how to do it, not just of trying to appreciate painting, but really trying to figure it out. I encountered both of these paintings. So the painting on the left is White Flowers, Agnes Martin. It's part of the Metropolitan Collection in New York. And I encountered this painting. I was just sort of struck with, it's for sure minimal. But the minimalism, when you get up close, it feels very handmade. The grid is very handmade. The little differences become significant in the pressure of the brush and the mark that Agnes Martin used to apply. Definitely minimal, definitely striving for a kind of beauty that's related to minimalism, but I wouldn't call it calm. In fact, when I encountered it, I got kind of worked up. I mean, it's calm, but not low energy. Did I say that wrong? I would say it's calm, but not low energy. There's something about it that kind of stirred me up. The painting on the right then is by Pontormo. It exists in the Santa Felicita Chapel in situ in Florence. And it's the narrative of Christ being deposed from the cross. And a very different kind of painting, really dynamic, very asymmetrical. The forces at work there, not minimal at all, very maximal, and really not a very effective illustration of the narrative. I mean, the artist took a lot of creative license here. And I sort of occurred to me like, well, why not? You know, the narrative was well known. Why emphasize it? Why not do other things on top of or with the narrative? And those other things really I became interested in the kind of playful formalism that
you can't. No, this cannot.
Just a gentle reminder, everybody, to stay muted if you can. that kind of playful formalism. And so I really began to understand painting as an expression of the painter's personal geometry, and that one's geometry is linked to one's personality and one's philosophy. Another way of saying it is just understanding that you could locate meaning in form. So as a 19-year-old, that was my thinking, but I didn't really have the capacity to pull it off. And so it's very much like these two geometries. I just thought, I'm going to slap them together and kind of hope for the best. In my mind, I was very much thinking the top half of this painting, which no longer exists, it had to be destroyed. It was like a Pontormo-like painting, and the bottom half being white objects, and the geometry of the pattern and the architecture of the chair would be kind of like Agnes Martin paintings, sort of slapping it together and just sort of crudely hoping for the best. It just looks like a nightmare to me now. So leaping ahead here to a painting that happened late in grad school, which I really consider one of my first mature paintings, being mature because I knowingly sacrificed some of my ideas in favor of others. The subject of the old TV turned on suited me really well, formally and conceptually at the time. The TV is it's a container that gets imbued with human intimacy, particularly these old TVs that you had to fondle to get them to do anything. And because they're old, it made me think about how long and how many people stared at this thing for just, how many hours. There's something very intimate about that. And that because they were old pieces of technology, there's that kind of nostalgia, but they still work. I mean, you still can turn them on, and something about being charged with electricity that made it feel like it was in the here and now as well as connected to the past. And then tuning them to static made it feel like they were in the act of becoming something. There was not an image on the screen. Could be any image if you just, fondled the antenna a little bit. I also thought that the static kind of felt like a found Agnes Martin grid found out into the world. I should clarify here that all the work that I'm going to show you has been painted from direct observation with oil paint, meaning the subject is always sitting there and I'm staring at it. It's with me in the space that I'm painting, and I'm looking directly at the object or the whatever. So I started to think of these forms as the phrase that I was using in the studio for composition was pregnant bubble. I really like it when a painting is aware of the edges of the picture plane and sort of exude pressure on the edges of the picture plane. There's something about that, like it knows its limitations. It almost feels like it knows that it exists. And this phrase, pregnant bubble, I like pregnant because it felt like a container for something unknown, but something unknown that we feel there's some sort of intimacy with. Particularly when it's your own child or someone And I was looking around for other forms that had this pregnant bubble idea. So other domestic objects or other objects that felt like they were just gently bulging out into our space. So this is a pillow stripped of its case. This is my forehead. So some size here. This painting is fairly little. It's I think 12 inches. And, this is not a painting, but this was my pregnant wife. At the time, this form was like really all around me. And looking back, I mean, she was like the best, the one I should have painted her. I don't know why I never had her pose for me. But this form had direct meaning in my life. I mean, I was full of excitement for like what's gonna happen, and also uncertainty and anxiety about the future. And looking at those paintings now, I think they have all those qualities. But then, then he popped out, and my life changed. I became a father and a husband and a homeowner and a dog owner in quick succession. And I went from having basically no responsibilities except for myself to having like tons of responsibilities. Life changed. And at that time, I took a trip to Chicago and saw this painting by Franz Snyders called Still Life with Dead Game, Fruit, and Vegetables in a Market. And it's a really large painting, I think 14 feet or 12 feet wide. And when I encountered it in this moment, being a young father, it just hit me like the word that hit me was delightful. How delightful it was to look at. There's the delight of just the narrative, which is funny and grotesque. And we have a guy here. He's presenting his goods for us to choose from. While he's looking at us, there's a little pickpocket here, picking his pocket. And then under the table, there's this cat in the shadows watching these roosters fight. There's just a lot going on in the narrative. And there's a lot going on in terms of the kind of playful formalism of the rhymes and the rhythms. Just to point out, a few, if you look at like the white wings of this pigeon, I guess, and that V shape, then you have the V shape of the white tusks of the dead boar. And then you have the white wing of the large bird here, making this lovely, diagonal. And the boar's mouth also, there's like another movement where the boar's mouth is red and the blood's dripping down onto all the other dead things, all the way down to the roosters, and then climbs back up to the guy's red shirt, making another kind of V shape. And it goes on and on and on. The more you look at it, the more you just sort of see these very, what feels like a busy composition. And it is actually really intentionally organized. And I just found that like such a wonderful relief and so fun to look at. Then there's also this painting by Philip Guston, which I love for an entirely different reason, but also resonated with me at the time. This is called Painter's Forms. And it's just so dumb. It's a head, half of a head really, that's just throwing up some of the stuff that Philip Guston likes to paint over and over in his paintings, just throwing them up into like an empty pink void. There's something about that idea, which I thought was just so dumb and so great, how straightforward it is, that if you were to say that to somebody, like explain this painting, they just wouldn't be able to understand why that was a good painting, but it is. So this idea, this kind of delightfulness and the kind of dumbness, I felt like was really important to me. So I made this painting, made many paintings, but here's one. We're stepping ahead here. Just considering the physical messiness and emotional entanglement of domestic life. It just didn't make sense to change diapers and then go to the studio and strive for a kind of beauty found in minimalism. So I was painting in the basement of my studio was in the basement, and I was organizing those types of basement objects into a construct, a geometric construct that I thought of as a tangled donut. Many directional forces that rhyme and create rhythms around the edge, and then an empty center. And I did like the word donut better than the more geometric term torus, because I thought donut implied a kind of Americana, and I was interested in that. Here's a detail. Okay, more paintings from the basement. I want to tell you about something that Matthew Weiner said. He's the creator of Mad Men, which is that TV show, about ad men from the 50s. When he was asked how he created such a believable time warp to 1960, he said, quote, "When you do 1960, someone did not go out to a store and buy everything that day. The women's clothing is not from Vogue magazine 1960 because it wasn't available to regular people until 1962. So if you're doing 2007, you can look around and see that there are people dressed from the 80s. There are antiques around. There is furniture. Everything that went on beforehand is existing at the same time. And everything that went on, end quote, sorry. And everything that went on beforehand in a domestic setting eventually finds its way into the basement. My challenge and thrill was making formal rhymes and rhythms to hold this tangled donut together. This is what a tangled donut composition as well. The donut hole is just a little bit off center. And we go round and round. There's like a parade of ellipses that help hold things together. And there's lots of other little formal connections. And hopefully interesting things to see along the way, along the path of experience in the painting, including Dwight Schrute and Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music, forever welded side by side. Be an interesting pair. This painting also is important because it was the first major one where I introduced this pink grow light that I had in the basement that I was using to sprout my vegetables for the vegetable garden. And I wanted more color in the paintings rather than the dingy brown of the basement. So I started using this pink light, which turned everything either in the light, it was pink. And if it wasn't in the light, it sort of tinged green. And so the paintings just became pink and green, which I love. It's a great color combo. Okay, fully embracing my maximal tendencies here, wondering is more. When making a painting, I decided to try to push that and splice in humor, a little sex, what I ate that day. I sort of would put a bunch of, just put stuff in there and try to make it work. Really, my pleasure was to find ways, subtle and clever ways, hopefully, of tightening the composition through rhythms and rhymes. Or any formal devices. I thought about I put it in there and make it work, and I put that in and make it work. And I keep adding stuff so the thing would be so tight, like it was about to pop. And little things like this. So here's baseball player from the 2006 World Series. The pitchers and the Miller High Life girl on the 4th of July edition, Tall Boys, with the same sort of triangular arm pose. And there's things like that all throughout the painting. And I really wonder how long it would take someone, if I didn't prime them, how long it would take for them to find that kind of connection. I think some of them maybe occur quickly, and some it might take a long time for someone to really notice. And that's good. I like that. Or Captain Crunch's hand and the model's hand pinning up laundry. These are all detail shots. It's a duck sauce packet. So continuing on, and now you see my son starting to model for me pretty regularly in these paintings. I wanted to encourage the viewer to invent their own narrative. That actually became a very motivating thing in the studio. How do I make a painting that is representational, that has narrative, but doesn't necessarily have a narrative that I'm dictating? Not only that, but that it has enough interesting, compelling imagery to hook someone, and the rendering seduces them, and then they stay interested through composition so that they want to sort of invent some kind of their own narrative. So in this, there's like a strange, impenetrable thing in the middle. of the painting that shunts all the narrative action to the four corners of the square, which this painting is 4 by 4 feet. And detail shots. My son models now regularly. He gets paid. It's like part of his weekly allowance. We kind of always have some paintings going, so you could see how it's painted, the surface. And what it may look like in the studio, this big aluminum foil thing does exist. In an attempt to slow the viewer down even more by offering multiple experiences, I worked on building more rich and varied surfaces to these paintings. So more speeds of brushwork, more evidence of scraping and sanding, valetors and glazes, really trying to marshal all the painterly devices I could to make the surfaces really dynamic, so that the paintings really assert themselves more as object and image. So up close, if you were to study the painting, you hopefully would just be really interested in the rich surface, and thinking of the painting as, an object, a surface that has paint on it. And then when you stepped back, you would see it more as an image, and that would be also very compelling and interesting to you. Here's a detail shot. Okay. I want to just read an admittedly reactionary thought that happened about this time, emerged in middle age. Cinema and television are the masters of narrative. Photography is a much more efficient form of documentation. Music is superior at catharsis, and propaganda is most effective via the internet. That leaves painting the domains of materiality and ambiguity. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the recent paintings now and the paintings that are in the show. So an example that I've been holding up in my studio of a painter that sort of engages with materiality and ambiguity is Edwin Dickinson. Here's a painting of his on the right, Evangeline, portrait of Evangeline, in which he uses techniques that grow out of the picture making process to distance the viewer from the image, making the subject look more remote and the painted surface more affrontive. My painting on the left, this was not a direct thing. I just noticed this after some time, this comparison. My painting of Emma on the left, in which I layered a gradation on top of the portrait of a very fidgety young model with the full intention of using that gradation to unite the surface so that I could go back into it. But then I just thought, I like it like this. So this is a painting from the exhibition Companion Paintings up right now. It's part of the first and main suite. My current practice revolves around painting my son from direct observation, then bringing these portraits into the studio to be color informants for invented scenes and abstract paintings built on gradations. This is where the progression of the first suite starts with this painting of my son done in Iceland at a residency, and using a limited palette that was arrived at through noticing the shifting green as the perpetual summer sun reflected off of the grasses. Without a true red, this Icelandic palette leans towards salmony red oranges and red violets balanced with acidic yellow greens and minty blue greens. This is a little painting. I think it's only 9 inches tall. So I use this reduced palette to create several abstractions based on gradations. You can see the minty and the acidic yellowy green sort of take over, but behind them are the red-orange kind of colors. This is a little 12-inch tall painting, but this is similar color, but this one's 48 inches square. And this is I think it's 9 inches. And including this Tondo still life, which kind of has its own little side story here that we'll talk about. It started with this Durer painting that I saw at the Metropolitan, which I love. It's a painting of St. Anne with this really fun nurse's outfit on from long ago with those kind of bulging eyes, which I thought was just great. I really like this painting. And so I thought, oh, I'll do a painting of myself dressed up like St. Anne. And around me, I'll put the ingredients to make kimchi. My idea being that St. Anne is a sort of a saint of healing, and I make a lot of kimchi because it's delicious and really healthy. It's a way I take care of myself. And so I was going to make a painting sort of about that. But I think it's this sort of progression. You see how it starts on the top left. The self-portrait is completely obliterated by the end on the bottom right, can illustrate how ideas really were arrived at through painting. They definitely do not get thought up and then executed. It's like I'm always of two minds. I think I have a really good idea to start, but I also sort of know in the back of my mind, this idea might just totally change. I just need enough to get started. So the progression here is over about 3 years. And here's an image of the painting in progress with all these things hanging up in the studio and my favorite pink light. And here's a possible arrangement for how the suite would look hanging together. I think the intrinsic moodiness of the pink and green harmony has infused these paintings with some of the vivid peculiarity of an Icelandic summer and helps bind the suite together. Also, things like a painting featuring a skull adjacent to a portrait of a boy so that a sense of the boy's skull and mortality is invoked. Memento mori can be a heavy-handed art historical metaphor in the contemporary moment, but because the association is one of proximity between discrete works, I hope the well-worn metaphor finds new power. Okay, this is the source painting for the second suite in the show. Finn, he's playing darts in the basement. Just to explain, this is, I think, I can't remember. It's something like 27 inches or something in diameter. And there are actually lots of panels that got assembled to make this work. So you see some lines in there that are actually pieces of wood that have been attached as this thing kind of grew from its original smaller painting. And here, that little head, which is about 1 inch in the source painting, I scaled up about 20 times and imagined and used the same colors, but imagining my son if he was like huskier. He's a pretty skinny kid, but there's something about just wanting to imagine him with more weight, like that I found really just something to think about. It took a long time to figure out how to finally resolve this painting, but I really like it. It's the one that feels the freshest because it took so long. I barely got it done in time for the show. And this is a gradation from his hair on the painting, on the source painting on the left, Finn's hair. The abstract painting, which allows for a more direct investigation of color and mark, I hope can prime the viewer to appreciate the nuanced painterly maneuvers often overlooked in image-driven paintings. Now, this can be true, especially when the paintings are viewed adjacently and have a strong color connection, or at least that's my idea. This is a little gradation pulled from the refrigerator on the left in this basement painting. And here's a possible arrangement for how the suite could hang. Okay, last suite in the show. This is the source painting. It's 12 by 10 painting a fin in the basement again. This gradation is pulled from the ceiling colors around this light fixture, the rafters of the basement. This is these studio paintings. They're all really happening in my studio, but the paintings that happen away from the primary source, but I'm using my painting as a reference. They're built very slowly and with many layers, moments of deeply embedded color preserved as fragile wings of paint form along the edges. So this is a gradation of the highlight on his cheek on the left into the shadow of his hoodie, intensified like with Joseph Alber's ideas using a complementary color around it. This is a painting that didn't quite get ready for the show. I thought it was maybe ready, but I'm still working on it, on wanting to release it. It's imagining him, again, using the colors from his head on the source painting, imagining Finn grown up with long hair and a beard. This is where the painting began, or somewhere in the beginning. I wasn't quite sure what that is going to be, but there was something about that looked kind of hairy. And then we're progressing through the top line. This is where I thought maybe I could feel okay with showing it. And then I thought, no. And this is where the painting currently, the state that it's currently in, where it sort of got disrupted again. And I want to do something else. I didn't want it to, this I thought felt a little too cartoony maybe. And I wanted to feel different. So that one's still in the works. And this, I'm going to just end here with a few paintings that are in the works that continue in this vein, but that aren't finished. This big painting, this is 54 inches. I really don't know what it's going to become. I wanted Finn to pose. He's older now. He's like a gangly teenager, and I wanted that awkward gangliness. I wanted a pose that really emphasized that. And I also was really just into this cobalt blue shirt that he had and the way that it glowed in the daylight. So that was our starting point. And I think it's going to probably change dramatically when we get back to it this summer. But sort of alongside that, there was this painting, which is in the show just as a standalone little blue painting, which is further, I'm interested in this cobalt blue and trying to get it to behave, because it kind of is temperamental cobalt blue. It's kind of a quest, as I thought it, for the best blue. Like, how can I use these materials to make this blue that I just kind of have in my mind, but I wanted it to really feel like a deep, rich cobalt blue. And you could see how much it was a quest. It got built up a lot on the edges. It's just layer upon layer upon layer to try to get the right kind of alchemy, really, is what I felt like I was after. Okay, that's what I got for you guys, but I want to end with just like a question that I ask myself a lot these days that we can talk about or not. Can a critically minded contemporary painter just sidestep the pressure to narrowly brand their work without risking irrelevance? That's something that I mull over a lot in the studio, because I'm afraid that the work, as much as I can craft a narrative around it to make it feel like it all hangs together, I also fear that it might just be too fractured, and it seems like what kind of painter is this person? Like, we don't know. He's hard to talk about. So, he's hard to sell or whatever. That's where I'll leave it. I'm going to stop sharing. I guess we can share again if we want. I'll leave sharing so that if we want to refer to any paintings, we can. But with that, I really would love to hear what people's impression of the show was, or if you have any other questions regarding the process. Anything else I could expand on, or I'm open
I
to
have two
anything.
questions. When you're talking about like relevance in your painting, do you try to set what you want it to be relevant about before you paint it, after you paint it, or are you really trying to find the relevance while you're painting it?
Relevance, did you say?
Yeah.
I think about it this way. I definitely need it to feel relevant to me to start. There has to be something there that gets me excited. It's usually some sort of personal connection. It's really easy for it to feel that way when I'm painting my son. That feels very relevant. So that definitely has to be there to start. And most of the paintings take a long time. So as they go, the thing that I started with, it has to be added to so that it stays interesting and stays relevant, because some of these paintings can take weeks, months, years. So they grow and they get added to. And then what I'm doing right now, I hope, is trying to make them after the fact feel relevant to you. And I think that's probably definitely less good and less focused on that part of the job of being a painter than I think I am now. And hopefully it does seem, in some ways, what I'm saying, it feels like somehow relevant to you or some of you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I also have a question. So I'm currently taking a fundamentals of design class, and we're learning about like the basic art elements. So I was wondering if you had a specific element that is your favorite or might even like inspire your like work the most.
That's a great question. For one, when you said that, I just thought, oh my gosh, you are so lucky. I wish I could utter the words. I'm taking fundamentals of art or fundamentals of design or drawing one. Those are great times. In terms of, I've never been asked that. What was my favorite element of design? I mean, I'm really into color and composition, but that's broad. If I break that down a little bit, color interaction, as you were probably taught about Joseph Albers, or you will be taught about Joseph Albers and color interaction, like those ideas, I think are endlessly interesting. To get color to do things, surprising things, to get one color to look like another color, or to get colors to vibrate off each other, or to use color to show space. I think that's probably the kick I'm on lately, and specifically in these gradation paintings, is using space and atmospheric perspective, color to create space. That's a way I'm able to judge whether these paintings feel like they're anywhere close to finished, is when, even because there's nothing there's no object to create space. So it's actually really difficult, but through very subtle things, to get there to feel like there's a real tangible space to you get to enter into as the viewer. That's my latest kick. But like, you can't go wrong with any of them. I tell my students all the time, these projects is some basic project that you might do in a fundamentals kind of class can be infinitely expanded. It might become the thing that you build your whole life, your whole career on. Just some little, it seems like a toss-off little exercise, and in one of those classes ends up being like the thing for you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dale.
Hey, Tim.
I had a question for you. That I know that the titles of some of those paintings that you did in the basement were the title revolves around somebody named Dusty. Could you tell us a little bit about Dusty?
Yeah, I usually talk about him, but I didn't want to. I feel like I had to cut some stuff just for time. But yeah, there's several there. Dusty, he's a sort of an alter ego that emerged post graduate school when I just needed to get out of my own way. Like struggling with after graduate school, what do I paint? and it's got feeling really heavy. And after seeing that Franz Schneider's painting and the Philip Guston painting, it just sort of emerged that like I didn't have to make these paintings about myself, that I could be kind of acting more whimsically, not like picking up a still life object and wondering how this represents my soul or something. Like I could just be like, I want to paint this. And so I would put it in, and they started to create to me like a character. And then the still lifes became less still life more as like scenes that were Dusty's life, that they were arranged in a way that they really felt like Dusty occupied this space. And the name Dusty actually has a really interesting story. It's one of these maybe prescient moments where I was taking that round brown Dusty Stacks painting to a show, but I didn't have a title. And Finn was like, my son was, I think 2.5 or 3. And we were talking, and he was with me in the car. And I was like, I don't have a title for this painting, Finn. And he said, what's a title? And I told him, well, it's like a name, like your name's Finn and the painting needs a name. And he said, how about Dusty? Which he must have heard somewhere. I don't know. But when he said that, it was just, it was like this, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. It's probably American. It's sounds like an American person to me. And it was a pun on like the dusty basement. And it just conjured this person for me quickly that I then just ran with. It was liberating to just then not worry that this isn't me on display here. This is some other fictional character on display. And I can get away with like putting all this weird stuff in there.
I was wondering, it seems to me that you know, in terms of the information about the color that you're using, you showed that Pontormo painting at Santa Felicita, which is an amazing space that painting sits in. But I found it interesting that when you introduced that pink light, suddenly your paintings took on that kind of mannerist kind of quality in terms of like mixing those pinks and greens and stuff. And I was wondering if you were conscious of that or just kind of observed it after the fact.
Yeah, definitely that Pepto pink back and sort of weird like toothpaste Aquafresh kind of front in that Pontormo painting and the central figure. Yeah, I love. And you know, I don't know how conscious I was in that very moment where I thought, look at this pink painting. I was conscious of just wanting color, and I had this pink light around, and I thought, oh, this is great. But then I realized, Pontormo's in there real deep. It's not just compositional arrangements. There's other things. And, you know, again, after that initial sort of impulse and thinking about that, I mean, I've definitely had conversations with people like we seem to be in a mannerist period right now. Again, like that seems to be the way that figure painting mainly is happening. Or largely. Mm-hmm. So there's something maybe about that like I can't avoid, that this is the moment I'm in, and mannerism feels like, you know, maybe the thing that's happening, and I can't be entirely outside of it, even if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a nice observation about the manneristic character of the painting now.
I'll jump in, Neil. I'm trying to keep room for the students, but so my takeaway phrase that you said tonight was just beautiful. It says, didn't make sense for me to be changing diapers and then go to the studio and strive for minimalism. I love that. And I'm hoping that my students are hearing like that. It really seems that you're taking your life and your interests and your kind of position first to create the body of work, and then kind of ask questions and dialogue. Lev asked about what is relevant. And I guess I'm going to kind of follow up with this question with that, because like when you talk about relevance, are you talking about meaningful moments for you, or are you talking about relevance like in the scheme of like the contemporary criticism of painting? Like who's your audience that relevance maybe is that you're talking about? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's a hard question to I'm not going to be able to answer it, but I got to say that the way I'm thinking about it, one word of wisdom from a friend was like, that has stuck with me just was, Neil, if you're interested in this, someone else will be. That just trust that someone else will be interested in this. Like, in other words, your audience is only one. And then afterwards, you got to find the people out there that are kind of like you, that at least are kind of like you. So that was that's something that stuck with me. I think I have, enough ego that like, I want to participate in the contemporary conversation. I definitely feel outside of the mainstream part of the contemporary painting conversation. But I don't want to totally dive into the stream either. Like, I want to redirect the stream. I mean, that sounds like crazy egotistical, I think, but I don't know. I'm a teacher. I talk to painters all the time, and I feel like I could put some ideas out there, and I'm not so, naive that I feel like I really can make some big difference, but at least in my smaller circles, I feel like there is, interesting conversations to be had. It has to do a lot with, I think, sincerity in painting as well, and how a painter feels about market forces. Those sincerity, I very much am interested in. Market forces, I'm very much not interested in. And, I think sincerity often doesn't align with market forces. So I don't know. The answer is I feel really conflicted. The other thing that in terms of audiences, I would tell students, like, if they're all on Instagram, everyone's on Instagram, and you have your audience. Like, if you could get 500, 1,000 people that actually care about the work that you're making, you've made it. Like, forget, some other dream of like being some sort of art star. Like, that's all you need really to build a career. So in the audience that is now like the whole world, because everything can be shared across the planet, I think that's sort of dangerous to think that way.
So, Neil, this made me think of, I went to see Kerry James Marshall do a presentation, and I was struck, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I was struck with how mercenary his approach to painting is. I mean, to hear him speak was to hear him say, I wanted my paintings in museums. I studied and figured out what had to happen for them to be in museums. I mean, it was a very careful, calculated, this is what I want, this is how this is going to happen. And I thought that was, on one side, I thought that was great. I mean, knowing exactly what you want and how you want it to function, where you want it to be, is really great. You talked about genuineness and sincerity. And one of the things that your paintings got me to think about as well is being a man dealing with subjects that can relate to domesticity is like, whoa. And so, I mean, I think that I really like the work a lot. But I can see how that there's a lot of tension in it.
Yeah, that's good. I like tension. I think that's good. Yeah. And I sort of agree with you. Like, I think that's a total valid position that Kerry James Marshall has. Like, I think the art world's big, and I'm sure his motivations are pure for what they are. Like, I think he's in the museums. Great. He has, a huge audience, and he's making painting popular for people that maybe wouldn't have been into painting. And I think that all that's great. Yeah. I just find, weirdly, I feel like painting could kind of be connected to like farmers markets and like why Etsy is popular, like, in fact, I'm going to, hopefully get tenure here soon. And I want to show at like state park lodges and public libraries and spaces like that. Like, that's sort of I had that revelation actually in the shower one time. It's just like, that, what am I doing? Even wanting a gallery. I don't want a gallery. I'd love to show at a farmer's market.
Neil, I do have a question for you. I read one of your interviews and they were talking about your process, and you said you don't really have a process. You have more of like guidelines. And hearing you talk about how you approach your work, I think there's usually this narrative that artists just like go into paint and paint from their hearts. And I don't think that's true either. And I don't think there's a specific method where you can approach a painting and say, okay, this is rule number 1, number 2, and number 3, and this is how I do it always. And I see you in the middle. I see your work in the middle where you start with an idea of what you want and then you keep at it. Do you have any advice on how young artists can find their own process, how we can develop our own guidelines in a way?
Oh my gosh, so much advice. It's hard to know where to start. I mean, some core tenet to my teaching, I must be core because I find myself saying it over and over and over, because a lot of times the way students talk about their work, I feel like it's pulling it out of me, is just that you just need a nugget of an idea. There seems to be this like, I don't know where exactly it comes from. I think it might come from public education. I think it could come from wherever, to like an idea is supposed to be fully formed and then the painting happens as the after effect. And I just see that entirely. I think that's it's not as wrong for everybody, but it's entirely wrong for me. And I think that's probably true for a lot of painters, that like the ideas formulate as you paint. But like they have to be linked to the material. And different kind of ideas happen that way. Painterly ideas happen that way. They're ideas that often when you say them, they sound really stupid. And so if it sounds really stupid, but you kind of think it's interesting, that's probably a sign that it's a very good idea for a painting. So to get started, I just encourage students to have just some sort of nugget, something, just be visual. Like, I'm really into this plant. I love the way this plant looks. I'm going to paint this plant. Like, that sounds like a stupid idea, but it might be all you need to really get into something deep and interesting that generates, meaning for you. So I guess I'm saying, another way of saying that maybe is like, don't worry about, don't plan it all out. Just probably paint more or whatever you do. Maybe you say you were a painter. Yeah. So just paint a lot. And so some good practical advice that changed my life really is that, along the lines of what I was saying, is I keep an open book in my studio with a pen on it. So as the ideas that occur to me while I'm painting, I can immediately write them down in the book. Little single words or phrases, or little sketches. And then when I go to have to write or talk about the work, I have this book full of the ideas, but they're ideas that occurred to me in the act of painting, not the ideas that I'm like after the fact sitting terrified of the blank page trying to generate. That to me was a game changer.
My question is in regards to a statement from your writing that accompanied your show, where you put forward the idea of the quality of flatness in painting being tied to a certain kind of like present tense or nowness. And then illusionistic depth, or I guess the way that you look into a painting as a window, conveys like future and past tense. I think that was kind of how you said it. And I find this delineation intriguing, and I'm curious of how a painting, something that's kind of a static object, can be indicative of past and present and future tense. And I'm wondering how this is tied to your kind of delineation between these gradient color field kind of paintings and then these more representational, figurative and still life paintings. This idea of future tense and past tense and present tense.
Thanks for that question. That was good. So one idea I have is, in physics, thanks to like Einstein, we equate time and space, this thing called space-time, that they're actually the same thing.
Mhm.
And I get kind of curious how that may be true of painting as well. That if I spend, not so much that my labor is the thing that matters. Like I worked on this 5,000 hours, you have to care about it. But just that I'm a human being and I spent a lot of time manipulating the surface of an object, and that is visible in the painting somehow, that somehow it contains more time, and then to unravel it requires time by the viewer, and somehow that can relate to not space in terms of like pictorial space in that case, but just like space is created through that sort of long engagement. So there is that side of things too. I should probably flesh that out a little bit better in terms of what do I mean by that. Can you ask again the second part of your question, like how that idea is different as it pertains to the gradations versus the paintings that are image based? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I was when I read that, I thought that maybe I was onto something with these gradient kind of color filled paintings, really engaging this idea of just being a surface, just being present tense. Whereas these figurative paintings or these still life paintings kind of seem like they're honoring a moment of the past, or maybe making a wish for the future. And so,
mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I can see why you think that, but I think that's maybe more literal than I intended it. I really don't. I mean, the gradation paintings I know look a lot different than image-based paintings, but to me, they're really no different. They're basically the same criteria that I'm using to assess whether they're done. And one of those is like trying to create space. Like that big green or sort of blue to yellowy green painting, that was one of the first ones that really, it took a long time. And there's probably, 90 layers of paint on that thing, thin layers of paint. And I learned that the colors of each layer could be a little different. And you would notice those differences on the edges. It would look like layers. But in the center, the paint you put it on is totally opaque. So you put it on and all those layers sort of stack up and create like one color. And it feels like it has depth to it. So it's not the same kind of way of making space in a painting, but I was really trying to make space in those paintings, even though they're basically just atmospheres, I guess, without any real object. And the same is, those representation paintings are the same. They just happen to have stuff in them.
I'd like to ask something related to that, because the dark blue painting seems almost metaphysical to me, along with the kind of gradient paintings. They feel like they have a kind of space, but the space I think for me is more metaphysical in a sense as I look at them. And I'm just kind of curious if there's anything to that kind of almost like meditative objectness about them in terms of creating that kind of other kind of space. Yeah.
I love that interpretation. I love that you would think that. I definitely didn't think it quite that way. The way I would say it is going to sound really dumb. To me, it was like, I really want to make this a really good looking blue. Can I get away with absolutely nothing but a blue? Mm-hmm. Like one color. And, that it would be a meditative object. I'm happy about that. I would also be happy if someone was just like, "Oh, that's a really nice blue," and then walked on, But yeah, I think I mean, it's weird. It's just as much rigor, if not more, applied to this little blue painting than any of the others. It was hard.
Yeah.
to pull off.
It just seems like you do a lot of paintings in like garages and basements and these sort of peripheral places where people stash junk, and I'm just wondering if those are, you kind of prefer to work in a space like that because of what it evokes, or have you just found yourself working in spaces like that and then got interested in what was in them? Which comes first?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Well, my sister went to college and I worked in her bedroom. That was like my first studio. And I put plastic down. There was carpet. It's a suburban bedroom. And I hated it. The action that was supposed to be performed in the bedroom, the room dictated it. And I felt like I was fighting against that the whole time. So I think I just found a good fit when I hit, spaces that the space isn't meant for a particular kind of thing. And those auxiliary domestic spaces, I just love them for that. I love how garages and basements can be transformed into whatever you need them to be. Workspaces, studios. The basement garage in my Alabama home was built by engineer for Goodwill Tire, and he built it as a whole like wood shop, metal shop kind of thing. And and then there's also like a little wet bar that he had put in there, and he was clearly thinking the same thing as me. And I was like, this is perfect space. Like it can be whatever I needed. If I needed to look domestic-y, I can transform it. If I need to make a mess, I can. I would open the garage door up and take my leaf blower to clean out. And I would just start at the back and blast all the air out the garage door, like I couldn't do that in my sister's bedroom. Yeah, there's something about those spaces I really love. We're thinking about building some sort of just really large garage structure at our house right now because we don't actually have any of auxiliary spaces. The house is kind of small, and I find I can't work there. I have to work at campus because there's no space for me to just be weird.
I'm going to jump in here, Neil, and formally thank you. This has been just brilliant. Your show is exquisite. I've enjoyed watching the students engage with your paintings. That little blue painting is absolutely mesmerizing. When you and I discussed daring put it on the wall by itself, I can say has been remarkable. I see a lot of people spending a lot of time there. The whole show has profound importance for my students and for our institution. I want to thank you, and your talk is insightful, and I have lots of takeaways that I'll be sharing and pretending they're my own thoughts. So thank you. And thank you everybody for coming, and look forward to the next time that we can all get together.